Hello everyone, and welcome to Autocrat. This is bonus episode 17, or...
In other news, David and Solomon.
Yes. Now, from time to time, we host bonus episodes here on the show on what's going on in the world around us as the story unfolds.
Yep, we do that.
Now, this is called the In Other News segment, and well, we've reached the 900s BCE, roughly, in our main narrative. This puts us right in the path of the biblical story of David and Solomon. Now, this David is the David of, well, David and Goliath fame from the Bible before he becomes king of Israel.
Okay.
Also, it's Christmas. At least it is when this episode releases, so given that David and Solomon are the ancestors of the central figure of Christmas, it feels like it's an at least tangentially relevant story to discuss. You know, Christmas special.
Right, let's see what's going on.
Yes. First off, let's get some rough dates for where we are, or rather, when we are. The Nuremberg Chronicle says that from David until Babylon, or Babylon capturing Israel, is either 484 or 485 years. From Babylon's destruction of Jerusalem until the birth of Jesus is apparently 590 years again. The Nuremberg Chronicle goes into all sorts of stuff about the ages of the world we don't need to get into. Just know, Jesus is born in about 5 BCE. And yes, he is born 5 years before Christ. The timeline's weird like that.
I know.
So, the accession of David, by this metric, dates to about 1070 or 1069 BCE. And James Ussher dates the birth of David to 1085. So, you know, it's all roughly at the same time.
Sure.
He supposedly became king in 1063 BCE at the age of 22 and died in 1015 at the age of 70, after having ruled Israel for 33 years and the region of Hebron, as it's known, for 7.5. I've seen papers shift the chronology about 40 years in other directions, but you know, roughly right. David has a son called Solomon, who you might have heard of.
That's his son?
Yeah.
Okay.
He also becomes king of Israel.
Yeah.
Solomon is born in about 1034 BCE, and he founds the so-called Second Temple in 1012 BCE. This is the temple that the Romans will later destroy.
Oh.
Sorry about that. Solomon dies in 975 BCE after a 40-year reign, and the same year his son Rehoboam becomes king of Israel after his father, but the region called Judah rebels and splits off under a new king.
So we've got David.
Yes.
And he has a kid, Solomon.
Yes.
Who has a kid.
Rehoboam. I should clarify, by the way, I've mentioned to my co-host she could make a family tree, which we may put up on the website or may not, depending if we remember, but that's why she's repeating the name Rehoboam to herself very thoughtfully.
No, I'm just also doing what they do in books and movies and like explaining to a random character, also we have this and this and this, just so, you know, the reader can also know this.
Oh, you're turning straight to the microphone camera and going, now as you all know, obviously, as we all know, and then rattling for 10 minutes. I like it. So, we've got a period between about 1063 and 975 for the story we're going to be covering today.
Okay.
The broad outline, David succeeded by Solomon, but that's boring, so let's get into a bit more detail.
Right.
For this, we can use the biblical account in the Old Testament and a source called Flavius Josephus, who wrote something called the Jewish Antiquities. He's a Jewish source living in about the 1st century CE.
Okay.
David becomes king after his predecessor Saul and his sons are killed in battle against the Philistines and their corpses are desecrated. So Saul is spelled S-A-U-L, by the way.
And is not relating to David.
He is, spoiler alert for in a second, his father-in-law, but is not the grandfather of Solomon. So David is married to one of his daughters, but otherwise doesn't come into it. Saul had previously been king of Israel for 40 years, but his end had supposedly come because he had disobeyed God. He in fact asks one of his soldiers to kill him when the Philistines are about to capture him. It's this man, the one who killed him, who brings the news of his death to David and shows him proof that Saul is dead, such as the royal jewellery. David then mourns and prays, asking which city he should live in. I assume this refers to where his court should be. He gets the answer of Hebron and moves himself and both his wives there.
Oh, he has 2 of those.
He has quite a number of, let's call them love interests. We then get a civil war.
Of course.
This is because a son of Saul, called, I'm going to try this, Ishbosheth, is still alive.
Right,
Yeah,
so all the kids didn't get killed then?
No, I guess not, but I can't remember if that's a typo on my part, or if the sources do dramatically say all his sons die, or one of them says Ishbosheth is alive, or something like that. One of the generals of Israel's army takes Ishbosheth away across the river Jordan and proclaims him king over the majority of the kingdom of Israel. Making my earlier statement even more of a mockery, there is another son called Jonathan alive, who is one of David's friends, but that's not relevant here. Basically, everything except the tribe of Judah, which has declared David king, declares Ishbosheth king. So, out of the 12 tribes, Ishbosheth has 11. A Saulite army, and that's what I'm going to call that, heads out to make war on the tribe of Judah, but is routed in a battle commanded by David's maternal nephew. I don't know or remember if we get a name there. By the way, speaking of David's love interests, during this time, David becomes the father to 6 sons by 6 different women.
Okay.
Yeah. We then get a betrayal.
Gasp!
Abner, the general in charge of Ishbosheth's armies, is accused of sleeping with Saul's concubine. Abner is outraged at the lack of loyalty shown for his allegiance and writes to David over in Hebron offering to defect, basically. Long story short, he does head over to Hebron and winds up dead because of the jealousy of David's generals.
Why?
I don't remember.
What are they jealous for?
Probably just because there's a new favourite who's cozying up to the king, or at least the man who will be king if we can get this usurper defeated real quick. Ishbosheth eventually gets assassinated by people who hope to get rewards from David, and his head is placed in the grave of Abner. So, that's the last time I have to say that name. However, this doesn't benefit the people who kill him, as David kills them as regicides when they show up with the head.
It's a bit weird.
It makes sense. You killed one king. You're not going to keep them around in the court, are you? They have a habit of killing monarchs. We then get the tribes of Israel professing loyalty to David as king. So, huzzah, he's king now. However, the city of Jerusalem shuts its gates. They insult David by placing blind and lame people on the walls, which apparently is an insult because they think that those people will be able to stop him. A bit of ableism in our ancient sources there.
Yeah.
The point is, David, not happy. He settles in for a siege, eventually capturing Jerusalem. He rebuilds the city and renames it the City of David.
Of course he does.
This is the practice we will see again with people like Hadrian and Commodus in millennia to come. Quick spoiler warning there. For however many episodes' time. All of this has, by the way, taken over 7 years, but David is now finally king of a united Israel, not just Hebron. We then get David routing enemies called the Philistines in battle and waging war on them. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole of the Jewish antiquities here, because that would take far too long and we're not rooted in the context because we haven't done the rest of the Jewish antiquities. The point is, David reigns for 33 years in Jerusalem and has about 40 pages worth of detail. What I will say is some academic papers have noted that King David may have suffered from some sort of ailment toward the end of his reign. This is because he shows some symptoms such as coldness in his behaviour, a lack of activity in certain areas, I'm not going to explicitly say, and impaired cognitive function, according to the ancient accounts. Conditions such as Parkinson's and depression, among others, have been suggested, but based on the evidence in the Psalms of the Old Testament, there is a study out there which concludes David was most likely suffering from a bone disease known as malignancy.
What is that?
I didn't think to look that up. The paper just sort of says malignancy, and I assumed. Let me look. Because that is a very good question. You're hearing me researching live, listeners.
It's bone cancer.
Yeah, everything I can see says bone cancer, including the NHS website. So that's what I'm going to go with. That's one option. A paper from 2023 ascribes David a condition which I again haven't looked into called hyperthyroidism, which I'm assuming means too much activity from your thyroid glands, based on the symptoms described in the Old Testament.
Yeah, that one's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Now, let's unpack some of these events, because otherwise it's just me talking randomly about ailments without actually going into why people think David was behaving differently. David was married to Michal, daughter of his predecessor Saul of Israel, but they never had children together.
Okay, so that's one of the wife he didn't have a kid with?
Yes. Speaking of wives he did have kids with, David has lots of sons, and his fourth one is called... Solomon! His eldest is Amnon, and his second is Absalom. Amnon does something reprehensible to his half-sister Tamar.
Oof.
Yeah, Absalom, who is the full brother of Tamar, kills Amnon in revenge.
Yeah, he would do that.
Absalom receives a pardon from his father for the murder, but then undertakes a coup against him. He succeeds at first, but is killed by the palace guard despite David trying to rescue his son. So that's now two of his boys out of the picture. David's third son, the older full brother of Solomon, dies a few days after his birth.
So that only leaves Solomon.
Exactly. David passes his throne onto and is buried by his son Solomon. Solomon immediately faces a challenge from another half-brother called Adonijah. Even before David actually dies, Adonijah holds a festival and declares himself king, which is notably against the law.
Yeah, it would be.
A prophet at court by the name of Nathan urges Solomon's mother to remind the dying David about a promise he made long ago to make Solomon the next king. So, Solomon gets made king. Or so the story goes.
Mm-hmm.
The 2023 paper claims that this prophet Nathan might have used David's weakened state of mind to essentially trick David into thinking he'd promised this.
Ooh, drama.
Exactly. Still, this pays off, as Solomon does become king, and goes on to build the Second Temple, without which the authors claim Judaism might not have become a, quote, institutionalized religion, end quote. There is also a paper ascribing David to be depressive, but I've only read the abstract of this, so I can't really comment any more on it.
I mean, either way, David's dead. Solomon's king.
Yes. Now, do you know anything about Solomon?
That when I was young, his name reminded me of salmon a lot, and I thought that he was just a big fish.
Excellent. It's not what I thought you were going to say at all. Oh, brilliant.
No, I genuinely used to think Solomon just meant a very big salmon that doesn't exist anymore.
I mean, that wouldn't have been a bad name for an extinct species of fish. But no, as far as I'm aware, Solomon was a human person and not an extinct species of giant fish. You can imagine that if you want, though. Whether or not he is, Solomon is born in about 1034 BCE, remember?
Yeah.
We place the start of David's reign in 1063, so by the time he takes over all of Israel, it's somewhere between 1056 and 1055. So he comes along a good 20 years later.
Oh yes, the dates are the other way around.
Yeah, the dates count down.
Yes.
So we have first David becomes a king in the 1060s. He then takes over all of Israel from his rebellious brother-in-law in 1056, 1055, and then 20 years later Solomon is born. Solomon will therefore be about 19 when he becomes king, even younger than his father was. He's best remembered as a wise king and as the man who built the Second Temple. However, Josephus tells us his wisdom didn't carry on until his death.
Oh.
Rather, he became consumed by his love of women and abandoned the Jewish laws. He also married a lot of foreign women, which was against the law of Moses.
Men.
I mean, given that he's the king in the Bible, who the story says there were two women arguing over which one had had a baby, and he says, let the child be cut in half, and the reaction of the women says which one is actually the mother, which is held up as this parable of wisdom. This is quite surprising to me. I did not know this story before I researched it. Because Solomon even began worshipping other gods from the regions his wives were from to make them happy because of how much he loved them.
Okay, I bet that didn't go well either.
Well, accordingly, a prophet showed up with a message from God. The throne would not be taken from Solomon because God had made a promise to David that Solomon would be his successor. However, this same promise would not extend to Solomon's own son.
Ooh.
10 of the tribes of Israel would be taken away from the house of David and given to another. Rehoboam, Solomon's son, would be left with 2 tribes because he was a pious man. Solomon was aggrieved, but there was nothing he could really do. Accordingly, a man called Jeroboam rises up against Solomon. Solomon tries to have him killed, but Jeroboam flees to Egypt, having heard from a prophet that he is fated to rule. So the only thing left to say, Solomon dies at the age of 94.
I mean, that's not bad for that time.
It's really not, having ruled for 80 years, although this doesn't match up with Usher's chronology, and he's laid to rest in Jerusalem. His son Rehoboam is 41 years old and in a dire position. Upon Solomon's death, Jeroboam is summoned back from Egypt, and Rehoboam also tries to get himself declared king. Against the advice of those around him, he declares that he will be a far harsher ruler than his father had been. I mean, maybe he's trying to establish that he'll be a firm hand on the tiller, but it doesn't really work. Rehoboam ends up fleeing to Jerusalem and being left only 2 tribes and the temple his father had built, just as had been predicted. Rehoboam wants to wage war against Jeroboam, but is forbidden to do so by God. So the line of Solomon will continue to rule in Judah, but not over a united Israel, the 12 tribes all together. Rehoboam builds a village you might have heard of. It's called Bethlehem.
Oh.
Yeah. This is among other cities, but obviously that's the one that stood out. Incidentally, when Rehoboam had been king for 5 years, the first book of Kings in the Old Testament says the Egyptian pharaoh Shishak attacked Jerusalem and raided the temple and the palace.
Okay, who is Shishak?
That is the question. I spent a while on this. 5 years after Rehoboam is made king would be 970 BCE according to our chronology. This would leave us with high priest Panaijem II, according to one chronology. So not a pharaoh, but a high priest, because if I remember correctly, at the time Egypt has some devolved powers, which means that you don't really have any powerful pharaohs, but religious figures have stepped in. But don't quote me on that. However, Shishak is also sometimes identified with the pharaoh Shoshenq I. This guy is the founder of the 22nd dynasty and rules between 945 and 924 BCE, thereabouts. So you can see, there's a little bit of drift and disagreement between the 2 chronologies.
I mean, with stuff that are that far away, you will always be that.
Yeah. That said, Shishak also gets identified with other pharaohs, such as Thutmose III, Ramses II, and Ramses III, so I guess we could say it's a different one as well. Given that these people we've mentioned are about 5 centuries apart from each other in terms of when they all were. Point is, we don't really know. Still, let's keep going with it, shall we? We'll finish off the House of David and see what happens, because it's interesting to follow until its conclusion. So, Rehoboam dies after 17 years of rule, so in about 958 BCE.
Mm-hmm.
His son Abijah, Abijah, then becomes king of Judah for 3 years, being sinful but being allowed to rule because of God's love for David and, I suppose by extension, his family. His son Asa then becomes king for 41 years, reigning between about 955 and 914.
Who's next?
Well, it's his son Jehoshaphat, Jehoshaphat. I apologise to any Hebrew-speaking listeners out there. I'm not familiar with these names.
He spelled that wrong. He spelled that wrong.
Net king of Judah, according to my notes. and in his third year of rule he meets with the king of Israel, remember they're two separate things now, and fights in a joint war against the Arameans at somewhere called Gilead. After he's been king for 25 years, he dies and his son Jehoram becomes the next king in 889 BCE. It's during this time, by the way, we get one of the more notable prophets from the Old Testament, the prophet Elijah.
If you say so.
I can't remember anything else about him. I don't remember if he's the one who ascends to heaven in a chariot or if that's Eli. It's one of the two.
It's fine. Don't worry. I don't know who Elijah is at all. So.
Okay, oh yeah, you haven't.
And I thought Solomon was a salmon, so...
I mean, I haven't seen anything in these sources that indicates that he is not. Anyway, Jehoram is king for 8 years, giving the throne to his own son, Ahaziah, in 881. Ahaziah gets killed in battle alongside the king of Israel against a third party. This is only after 1 year, meaning the battle comes in 880. When his mother learns of his death, she kills the whole royal family.
That's a strong woman.
Yeah. However, his newborn son, Joash, is taken from the palace by his sister and kept in the temple for 6 years.
He spelled that
Killed
wrong.
in the temple for 6 years. I don't think that's accurate. During which time his grandmother rules Judah, hence why she finished off the entire royal family. However, Joash is eventually able to take back power from his grandmother and she gets killed, so he becomes king at just 7 years old. He rules for 40 years until 833 BCE, repairing the Second Temple during his reign and eventually passing power to his own son, Amaziah. Amaziah rules for 29 years, having become king at 25 years old, and dies in 804 BCE. His son Azariah becomes the next king. He is 16 years old, I'm spotting a trend here, and reigns for 52 years. Passing his power to his own son Jotham, or Yotham I guess, in 752 BCE. This means he dies just 1 year after the founding of a very obscure city in the middle of the Italian peninsula.
Okay, cool.
We probably won't get to it, it's not that important. Jotham, or Yotham, reigns for 16 years and dies at the age of 37 in 736 BCE. Then follows Ahaz, reigning until 720, during which time he sacrifices his own sons.
Okay.
We're just going to move on and not deal with that any further. We then get the kingdom of Assyria conquering the kingdom of Israel in 717 BCE. However, Judah, the bit we're focused on, persists. Assyria attacks during the reign of Hezekiah, Ahaz's son. I'm guessing he avoided the sacrificing somehow.
Or maybe he did very well. Made himself be forgotten.
I mean, they were looking for someone who was a fish person, given that everyone descends from Solomon, so maybe he was the first non-fish person.
Or maybe he sacrificed all his sons beside the firstborn.
Maybe. Or it's like Russian roulette.
Ugh.
Hezekiah manages to beat back the Assyrians, with an angel supposedly killing 185,000 people in camp, and reigns for 29 years or so, dying in roughly 691.
Mm-hmm.
Then comes Manasseh, just 12 years old, who rules for 55 years, so ending in 636. We then get his son Amon, ending in 634 after just 2 years. We then get Josiah, again just 8 years old after his father is assassinated, who rules until 603. The next two kings, son and grandson of Josiah, rule for 3 months and 11 years, meaning we get to about 592. Then there's just the next one for just 3 months, and then the last king, Zedekiah, who reigns for 11 years before Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon overthrows Judah. This would therefore be in 581 BCE according to our chronology, which does line up quite nicely with when Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon actually ruled.
Okay.
So in all, we get about 500 years of rule and 20 generations of the House of David.
Not bad.
Not bad at all. As a final caveat, and looking ahead to something that's going to dominate our story in centuries to come, Jesus is supposed to be of the House of David, supposedly descending from King Josiah. So, that brings us to the end of the House of David. What did you think?
Very interesting. Lots of people.
So many people. I mean, it's a bit like if we did all the Alba Longan kings in one episode, I suppose.
Yeah.
Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode. We hope you are either celebrating Christmas or enjoying the festive period. And until next time, with a regular episode, have a great week, everyone.
Have a great week.